Okay.
All right, thank you very much. So, lovely, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Anita Yadav. I am a project controls manager currently working with Turners and Townsend. So, it's a consultancy firm, and I work in defense sector. So, I work very closely with Ministry of Defense and, of course, the government of UK. Um, when I was asked to do a session around this, I thought I should do a session which is kind of uh, which I experienced very recently, and I thought I will just do a session around how to give feedback because when the environment where I am working in, giving constructive feedback is very, very essential because it helps the individuals and the organizations to excel in what they are doing and of course finding their next commission. So that's my introduction. I have been working with the consultancy firms for about 3 years now, over 3 years now. Before that, I worked in a utility company called Thames Water, and when I worked there as well, I always thought that feedback is the most important thing for anybody's personal development at work. So let's get started. I'm absolutely looking forward to this session. And after hearing many of your intros, I can actually feel that by the end of the session, I do hope that you take away something good out of the session. And personally, I would like to have the session as engaging as possible. So please do share your story if there is any and share your examples and make it as engaging as possible. So, before we start, I would like to share a story with you. And the name of the story is This Not Nobody Mentioned. So, I have an imaginary friend whose name is Bob. And one fine morning, Bob left his house unaware of a big snot on his face. He got out of his house, locked the door, and he bumped into his neighbor, and they exchanged the good morning messages. The neighbor spotted it, but didn't say anything to him. The neighbor thought, oh, I don't want to offend him. That too, first thing in the morning. Probably somebody else will tell him. Fine. Bob then approached his car, got into the car, and got to office. And when he was going upstairs, like taking escalator to the office, he bumped into one of his dear colleagues. The colleague spotted it, but again, didn't say anything. They walked together to the coffee machine, they chatted, but the colleague didn't mention it. And the colleague thought, oh, I don't want to offend him. I don't want him to know that it's me who told him. So probably somebody else will tell him, or maybe he will spot it by himself. So the colleague didn't say anything about it either. Fair. Bob had a very important meeting with the client later on in the event, and he walked in the office with a big snot on his face, and his colleagues with whom he had lunch, with whom he had some good repo, none of them told him about what they spotted on his face, and he just walked around that snot on his face in the office. As he was approaching the meeting room with the client, he bumped into his one of the oldest colleague with whom he started his career in the company. And that colleague spotted too, but didn't say anything. The colleague thought, oh, maybe this is not the right time for me to tell him because he's just going into the meeting. So probably that will upset him and he will think that why am I telling him now? So probably I will just leave it. And the colleague didn't say anything. However, what the colleague did was that the colleague tried not to have eye contact with him because the colleague didn't want to have the guilt. So that old colleague of Bob didn't mention anything to him either. Then came the time when Bob entered into the room full of client and he was there to deliver a very important bid. So he was bidding a contract or a commission. So when he entered, he could see that everybody's eyes were on his face. And when he started talking or delivering the presentation, he could see that people in that room were whispering, but nobody was talking or telling to him what they could see on his face, but they were whispering, and none of them were making eye contact with him. That made Bob very uncomfortable, and he excused himself to go to restroom. And when he went to restroom, he could see himself into the mirror, and that's when he spotted the big snot on his face. Now, the question to all of you and all of us is, what do we think how Bob felt? The very first thing which comes to our mind is Bob felt insecure. He felt a little bit cheated because he thought that the people who were around him were his colleagues he could trust. The people who were around him were the people who would tell him if anything was wrong with him or if they spot anything. And that actually pushed Bob into a bit of anxiety zone where he was like, can I trust these people? If the similar thing happens to me again, are they going to tell me about it or are they going to let me handle with it on my own? And this is just not a story about the snot nobody mentioned, but we are talking about serious trust issues here. We are talking about serious psychological safety here. And if you want to relate it to the feedback, then please try to put yourself into that situation in which Bob was there, because the colleagues, they were trying to be kind to him, but into that moment, into that situation. But do we think that they were really kind to him by not telling him what was on his face? I personally don't think they were kind to him because they left him vulnerable. They left him exposed. And poor Bob, he was just walking around in the office from his home, including his neighbor. No one was kind to him. Although they were pretending, they thought to themselves that they were kind, but they were not kind. And this is something which happens with the feedback as well. So let's move into the next slide and talk about the feelings of Bob. Something which I mentioned before. I think the very first thing which came into all of our mind was, why did no one tell me what was on my face? What would have happened if one of the colleague would have mentioned something like, hey, you got something on your face. Do you want to go into the restroom and check? None of them was going to offend Bob, but I'm pretty much sure if I was Bob, I would have been very appreciative of the fact that somebody spotted something on my face and told me about it. And now I have the opportunity to get my face cleared and be more presentable in the meeting, be more confident. The next one is, of course, we talked about psychological safety. So psychological safety is about creating an environment where everybody can bring themselves as they are, and they have the courage to speak up their mind about how they're feeling, and, without being judged. So into this situation, into the circumstances, do we think that the colleagues or the neighbor, I'm just including neighbor as well, because there is a bit of personal touch here, but the colleagues, did they help creating that psychological safety or creating that environment or ethos where people felt confident, people felt that, yes, we are safe to talk about the things? Do we think that environment was seen there? I personally think no, because every single colleague he interacted was not feeling safe to raise. And that could be because of the work culture, the work ethos, or the environment they are in. So the responsibility or the onus which is on all of us is, we need to share a bit of care towards our colleague when it comes to giving feedback, when it comes to taking care of each other. If it is worded correctly, then I'm sure everybody would appreciate a constructive feedback. Nobody would like to be exposed with a snot on their face. However, we just have to be a bit careful about how we address it. So when we are giving feedback, we have to give it a bit with empathy and sympathy, because we care about that person, we care about their progression, we care about how they feel, and we care about how they would like to be seen in the organization or in the personal space. So there's an element of caring. So when we are thinking of providing feedback, there are absolutely 4 and more feedback essentials. To me, the very first thing is creating a feedback friendly environment. So we should be creating an environment where we feel trusted, where we can actually rely on our colleagues that, yes, if we raise anything with them, they will take it in a positive way and then they will work on that opportunity to improve on that. And that can be created by giving everybody that chance to contribute towards creating that psychological safe environment. The second one is setting clear expectations. So when we are approaching an individual to get feedback, we need to set clear expectation in terms of why we are giving them the feedback. Why are we telling them? Because into our story, we did see that because nobody spoke about or nobody mentioned this note, it was like unspoken words, nobody mentioned. And the unseen consequences of it was that Bob felt hurt. He felt cheated because he thought he was working with a good set of people who will tell him if he's going anywhere wrong. So the story basically tells that if we don't highlight anything to the people, we are taking the opportunity away from them to improve. And that's not kindness. So that's the consequences of not speaking up at the right time. And that concludes settling clear expectations. So when we are approaching somebody with the feedback, it's important that we set the clear expectation. The intent has to be very right of why you're giving them the feedback, why it is in their best interest, and how it is going to impact them. The third is the importance of using inclusive language. I've seen it in my career that some people say, oh, I am just the way I am. Oh, this is how I talk to people. Sometimes it's important that we actually change the tone of how we address a situation. It's important that we actually adopt and be flexible to match the other person's energy when we are giving feedback. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I have seen in my lifetime that there are some good managers and there are some bad managers, and that those bad managers are not bad because they're bad human beings. It's just because they are not good at dealing with people. And perhaps that concludes the saying that it's the people who forms the company. And when people leave the job, they don't leave the job, they actually leave the people. And that is purely because sometimes as managers, as leaders, we fail to use the right inclusive language. And the fourth one is giving praises and recognition. So when people are doing good, we should be recognizing their hard work. Maybe a pat on the shoulder sometimes make a big difference. That praising them publicly, because I'm sure all of you have heard that, if you want to criticize somebody, criticize them in closed doors. But when you're praising somebody's good work, praise it in public so that they get good motivation. But that's what I heard and that's what I practice. Now, if we understand the feedback essentials, what I would like to provide you all, and I'm not sure if you're already aware of it, but this is something which I learned a long time ago when I was doing my Leading with License course. The SPI feedback model. It's very, very effective. I use it all the time. I use it with my performance measurements. Like, when I'm doing the performance conversations with my team, or when I'm speaking to my counterparts on a project, I do use it. And when I say I do use it, I use it in email, I use it verbally as well. And that's how I actually draft the feedback if I have to. It makes the conversation very, very easy. It makes the verbal conversation very easy because the SPI model structures the content of the feedback. So S stands for situation, B stands for behavior, and I stands for impact. So situation means when we describe a specific situation where we observe a certain behavior. And behavior describes the observable behavior. So what was the behavior like? why do we think that that particular behavior was not appropriate? So that's the behavior. And the impact, of course, self-explanatory, describes the impact it had on colleagues or on customers or on you. So that's a simple model. We might have encountered many, but personally, it works for most of the people. So if you want to try it, as an example, again, very recently, one of my good colleagues was removed from a particular project, and we all work into that environment where when the client demands or expectations or requirements change, the capabilities change, and then because of those change in capabilities and scope, the resource demand change, and therefore some people are replaced without them knowing. So my colleague was replaced by somebody else more senior. However, she was not told about it, and she sat in silence thinking, what did she do wrong? Where did she go wrong? Or what happened? Where did she not perform? And I think that silence basically killed her confidence, and she was trying to get constructive feedback so that she can then improve herself, and when she's going for another commission, she can actually be more improved into any of the skills which she lacked. So she wanted to get some constructive feedback out of it. But I think the project director didn't tell her the reason why she was replaced. And later on, when she approached her mentor, the mentor reached out to the project director and put it in a way that actually the mentor was trying to help her. So eventually she came to know that because the scope changed, so they wanted somebody else who had more experience in cost management, and therefore she was replaced. Now, this is a real example because I happened to speak with that colleague, and I happened to advise her that she can actually reach out the project director directly, but she was not confident. She again, she felt that she should be told why she was replaced. But the fact remains same, that we work in an environment where some people choose silence over constructive feedback just because they think they don't want to offend anybody. But choosing silence can make them good for that moment, but it will have it may have, but surely it will have some sort of lasting impact on that particular individual, be it on their confidence or be it on their ability. So um, to give another example in terms of how we should use SBI and give feedback. So for example, again, I just chose to use that particular example because it just came into my mind. So if you have to give give feedback to somebody who is working on your project team, and you observed that someone's behavior was not up to the mark, and they need to be known, they need to be told, and they should know about it. Using the SBI model, we will just put that in simple words, as in like at the project review meeting on Tuesday, gone Tuesday on 18th of May, you presented, Bob, you presented your analysis clearly, but when Ravi raised a concern about budget, you dismissed his comments without acknowledging them. So we are talking about the behavior. What did we not like? And if we didn't like, I am sure the individual Ravi didn't like it either. Then the impact, it's important to tell the person the impact so that they can understand how it affected the individual, and so that they can actually take up on that opportunity, or what was the impact of their behavior or their actions. As an impact, Ravi stopped raising any concerns, and this could discourage others from raising concerns in the future. It also meant we missed an opportunity to explore potential risks early. So you see the SBI model basically makes it a sandwich sort of feedback, not feedback, but sandwich sort of um, communication. So we're putting it in 3 steps. So we are explaining the situation as in like, oh, you did really well into that particular situation, but this was your behavior, which we feel is unacceptable. And this unacceptable behavior can have this impact on others and on the business. And I'm sure if we use this SBI model, the colleagues or the individual would be more open to accept the feedback rather than being dismissive of it. And we are then giving them the opportunity to take that feedback away, reflect on it, and then work on it, and then be a better version of themselves next time or in future. So I didn't put any other stuff on it because I just wanted it to be really simple. That was my message. That's the model I would like to provide in this session. So that's all from me. And only thing if I could say is please be kind to others. Please, if you spot anything on your colleague's face, as in, feedback wise, please raise them, please be kind to them, and please don't leave them vulnerable and exposed. Because if you don't tell them, then you're choosing kindness for that moment, but perhaps you're not kind to them. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
That's all
Anita.
from me, Kevin.
Does anybody have any questions? So I've got a question, Anita. So
Sure.
for you personally, how do you approach different scenarios differently? So if it is somebody that you are managing and you've got the kind of formal opportunity to provide feedback to them, do you still use the same methodology as if it was that scenario where you bump into someone in the corridor and you spot something that you should probably tell them about?
I absolutely follow the SBI method. It's like in my blood now because I have seen that by using this situation, this SBI model, I end up offending people less, and people are more open to the feedback. So yes, coming back onto the snot story, if I was one of the colleague, I would have definitely said to them in the same way situation as in like, hey, I know you're getting ready for your meeting, but I could see something on your face and I think it doesn't look good because you are going into the meeting, so it may have an impact of like clients may not be, willing to have eye contact and stuff like that. I'm sure we can create the impact, but yes, I would use probably the same sort of model to provide feedback onto that. And to my direct report, yes, I use the same model. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. I've got another question that applies
Mhm.
more to me than other people on the call. So, as a man in the workplace, you're very nervous about offering unsolicited advice. How do you make sure that the person that you're going to give feedback to is welcoming of that feedback? And is there a way that you would go about testing the water before you do start offering your two pence?
I think you have basically touched a very, I would say, very sensitive topic here. Not topic, but a question here. Because as a female, I have same concerns. Most of the people in my team are men, and we are the only two females within controls and performance. The one is the project director, and the second one is me. And I experience the same thing that sometimes when I am giving the feedback to my team members who happen to be male, they're very less serious compared to somebody else who's a male and giving them the feedback. So for an example, and I will address that, or I will come back to you on that. So
Yeah.
very recently we were talking about lessons learned on one of the projects, and because I have experience in lessons learned, so I gave feedback to one of my colleagues regarding how they delivered the session. And I said, well, in my past world, this is how I did it. I think if you will do it in this way, as in like if you deliver your lessons learned workshop in a qualitative way rather than quantitative, then perhaps it will have longer impact because we don't want to talk about how many lessons learned we have recorded. We want to talk about what's the qualitative, like where did we go wrong, what did we learn, and how it's going to affect a forthcoming project. I think they were very dismissive because they said, "Oh, I have spoken to X, Y, and Z, and they have done it in this way." And that's where I could see that people, especially when we are talking about gender, I think it's a matter of authority that people tend to listen to more and take men more seriously, especially if feedback is coming from female. So in your case, I'm not saying we are talking about gender, but unfortunately in my case it is to do with gender because there are not many females in controls and performance. But in your case, I think you have a very valid reason that if you do not have that trust among each other, then it's difficult because with good intent, you are approaching that particular individual and you are kind of like saying, hey, you did that and I didn't like that behavior. Would you mind rectifying that moving forward because it impacted this? And if that person doesn't trust you, then yes, they can take it other way around and they can be offended and like, why is he telling me all the time? Right. So I think to have that rapport, have that trust is important. But you would also recognize, Kevin, that trust is something which you can't build overnight. Trust has to be built in calm moments, right? And the only way you can actually build the trust into that conversation is by telling them that what you are telling them or sharing in terms of feedback is within their personal interest, because you want them to progress, you want them to be a better version, so you are invested in them. So if we talk about our intent and if we tell them about our good intentions, then perhaps it will land better than just approaching anybody coldly. That's how I would approach it.
Nice. Thank you, Anita.
Does that
Appreciate
answer your question?
that. No, absolutely does. Emma has her hand up.
Yeah, mine is
Hi.
about whether you've got any thoughts on how to approach feedback when it's in different situations. So where you're somebody senior and you've not observed what's happened directly, you've just heard about it from others, and others haven't chosen to sort of raise it directly themselves, and they've brought it to you as a sort of a senior manager. I just wondered whether you would do anything differently in terms of how you might approach that, particularly if you're getting a sense that this is something that other people are observing more generally about a person's behaviour.
So again, this is a part and parcel of a senior manager role, right? So especially with leadership, because the leaders are not directly involved with their direct reports or the second line of the reports. It's difficult for them to observe what happened on the floor plate, right? So they only hear from other people. And it's very common, Emma, trust me, because I do hear about, when I'm going into the office, people will say, oh, he did this on that project, do you know? But sometimes, because we as leaders, we do care about our people. In that circumstances, what I would say is approach that person, but don't have any preconceived thoughts. So don't judge them purely because other people are saying this. And as a leader, I always say, listen to both the stories, because that's what the leader should do. The leader should have a balanced approach when it comes to feedback, because you have not directly seen it. So I would say the best thing which you can do is you can reach to that individual directly and give them a hint about what you've heard, and give them the opportunity to put their side of story as well, so that then you can actually decide whether what you have heard is correct or not, because you do not know, you've just heard and you've not seen it directly. And that would be my approach on that sort of thing.
The other thing I was just thinking about is sometimes reaching out to see if there's somebody else that you've got a good relationship with who was in the meeting or whatever, who might be able to give you a view, but doing it through open questions rather than kind of going, I've been told this about this person, but potentially saying, have you got any concerns around how that meeting went and any of the behaviours from individuals, just to see if they've got any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think the only concern I can see by reaching out to a third person who share a good rapport with them will be, again, trust issue. And the question which I will put to you is, what is stopping you to reach to not to reach to that person? As in, like, what's the restriction? If you want to reach out to that person directly, you should. Do you know what I'm trying to say, Emma?
Yeah, no, I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I do,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So rather than having, indirect conversations, we should have direct conversations to avoid any, any misunderstandings, because I personally believe that will make situation more worse. So have direct conversation would be my advice.
Thank you. Can I ask another question?
Of course.
What about when you've got somebody who just won't hear feedback? So they are defensive or dismissive of the feedback because they don't buy into it. I just wondered if you've got any tips around the best way to follow up so that stuff doesn't just get sort of brushed aside as no, well, you told me that, but I'm going to ignore it and I don't think I need to do anything differently.
It's not uncommon in work culture. We all have seen it. So I think the best thing or best advice which I can give you on this is we need to get into the crux of this issue, as in why, asking the right questions, as in why do they think that feedback is not relatable? Why do you think that the conversations you're having is not going to add any value to their improvement? So until unless we don't know the why, so it will be difficult for us to convince them to take the feedback on. And if we don't know the reason why they're dismissive, we won't be able to conclude it. So it's really hard because we know that we have these type of people into our workplaces where somebody thinks, oh, I am just perfect and I never make mistakes. It's the other person's fault, or it's the this person's fault, this person's fault. We get into the blame culture, and the message is missed in this whole blame sort of thing. So I think it's important that we actually try to understand why that person is not taking the feedback. What is their reason? Because if they can come up with their reason and you can address it, then perhaps we'll have a way forward rather than just giving him feedback and feedback and feedback. If they're not acknowledging it, then we are just wasting our time. So rather than just keep giving the feedback, I think take the leap of faith and have that difficult conversation with them and ask them why they think that feedback is not right.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other?
Anita, yeah. I have another question, so keep firing at you. So we've talked about giving feedback. Mm-hmm. Do you personally seek feedback? And for the context of kind of the leaders on this call, as a leader in an organization, how do you go about creating a culture where other people actively seek feedback and you're the role model to them in that sense?
I am a great, or I would say biggest advocate of feedback. I do seek feedback, and when it comes to our PCRs, like performance conversations, reviews and everything, or 360 feedbacks, I actually reach out to people and I ask for feedback. And I use good feedback and bad feedback for my own improvement, because when people are giving me good feedback, I use them for my performance review. So I present them to my director to whom I'm reporting, and I tell them that, look, this is the great work I have done. This is the feedback I have received. And if people give me constructive feedback where I have lagged, I actually take them seriously and try to improve them on. However, Kevin, I would like to say that we must find a balance, because we do not want every negative feedback to affect us. Because if we get into the loop of taking every negative feedback and start improving, then we won't improve. So as an individual, I definitely know my strengths, I know my skill set, and I know where I lag. There are certain things where I'm comfortable with the way I am. So for example, I'm very vocal when it comes to talking about things or challenging, right? So if somebody gives me feedback saying, oh, you challenge every single thing, I would be very mindful of how I perceive that feedback. But if somebody says to me that, oh, I think you should be asking right question, then probably I can look into it and I will put a strategy in place to make sure that I actually put in efforts to ask right question, and I do a bit of research about the topic before I attend. So there must be a balance between getting the right feedback to your head so that you can then improve correctly. So it's absolutely important. I mean, say feedback is important for the continuous improvement, and there's there's a saying from I think it's from Nelson Mandela, which sticks with me all the time, that if a person is not growing and they're stagnated, it means they're dead because they're not learning anything. So feedback is really, really important. Be it good feedback, be it bad feedback, we individuals should know how to use it. So yes, I do seek feedback, and I do give feedback as well. If it is good feedback, I make sure that I let that person know so that they can continue doing the good job they are doing.
Thank you. Any more questions before we close? Oh, the last hour, Naginda has popped a hand up. Go for it, Naginda.
Hi, guys. It's a very interesting topic, but a very, I'm going to say, big topic as well. Sometimes people will not speak out because they also do not want to lose their friendship or their colleague, or they don't want to be seen saying the right thing. And the feedback is great. I mean, it's a great word, but I always wonder, are people honest in that feedback? Because we're all, conscious, and we want to be nice to each other, right? Which is be diplomatic about it, say the nastiest thing in the nicest possible way. And that doesn't come across, and people just step away. And you refer to reviews and appraisals. I often wonder, how honest are the appraisals? And then you'll see it'll all be either the middle, or nobody would dare write, you're doing so badly. But I don't think that is correct to write, but it's good to give advice. You need to improve in area A, B, C, D. I've seen it right up into the boardrooms, the same sort of thing happens. What gets talked behind the closed door doesn't help the individual. So if you really want to pull someone along with yourself, or tell them in the right way what it is, I think you've got to set the scene. And I think you said it earlier on, you've got to set that scene to say, we're going to have a coffee, we're going to talk about certain things. I could have got something wrong, but I just want to, check with you or bounce against you and see, was that the right observation or was it not? To make the person feel comfortable. And then we'll come down into the line of saying, I've got no time to do that. I've got to do my job. Doesn't matter whether you're a manager, director, whatever, HR. HR are very sensitive about this. We very often send the staff member to HR. Staff members themselves go to HR to seek advice. And it is a very difficult topic, I'm going to say. We all try our best to get the right advice and to give the right advice, because we want people to progress in their careers. But it is striking that balance,
Absolutely.
and follow up. Don't just say it and then just say, well, he or she got it. You got to follow up and see, and that might take a whole year and 2 years to see how the person is progressing. If you sincerely want to do it, it's a big investment of your time and effort. I mean, that's my observation.
No, you're spot on. See,
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. That's definitely very honest observation. And that's to some extent, 99% of the time, that's the reality, because we fortunately or unfortunately work into that environment where we have to think twice before giving the feedback. And you're so right. But this presentation is definitely more about like how we should be doing it. And yes, you'll encounter circumstances where you want to give somebody the feedback, where you don't have the courage because there's so much happening between, I would say in your head that you don't. And trust me, I have encountered those situations, but this is just the best practice we are talking about as if now. And I think that's how we should take it. But you're spot on. Thank you so very much for adding your comments to it. Well, Kevin, thank you so very much for providing me the opportunity, and to everybody who attended. Thank you so very much. You definitely kept it engaging, and thank you very much for all of your questions. And I really hope that we'll speak to each other soon.